We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. Have you ever felt like you were meant for something bigger? What if everything you knew about your life was a lie in just a few moments? I'll tell you the story of how a simple moment with a big horse changed everything I thought I knew about myself and revealed a secret that could alter my entire future. Stay with me because you won't believe what happens next. The sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. I stood by the old wooden fence, watching as the big horses grazed peacefully in the pasture. It was a rare moment of quiet in my otherwise chaotic life. For 11 years I had been searching for something I couldn't quite name. Something my husband, despite his best intentions, had never been able to give me. I wasn't even sure what it was until that day. It started with a simple gesture, one I didn't think much of at the time. The big horse. A magnificent **** mare named Grace had been distant since the day I first met her. She was known for her stubborn nature, never letting anyone too close. But that evening something changed as I leaned against the fence lost in my thoughts. Grace trotted toward me, her amber eyes locking onto mine. She stopped just a breath away, her warm, soft nose nudging my hand. In that moment I felt an overwhelming sense of connection, something so profound. It brought tears to my eyes. It wasn't just her gesture. It was the unspoken understanding, the silent promise that I wasn't alone. I had spent years trying to bridge a gap in my marriage, trying to feel seen, understood, and valued. Yet here was Grace offering all of that without a single word. What followed in the next few minutes was a moment so unexpected, so deeply moving that it left me questioning everything I thought I knew about love, companionship, and trust. But before I could fully grasp what was happening, something even more surprising unfolded, changing my life forever. Grace stood there, her eyes calm but filled with something I couldn't quite name, an unspoken wisdom. Maybe as her warm breath brushed against my hand, I felt a pull, a strange sense that she understood me in a way I hadn't experienced in years. My fingers gently grazed her silky mane, and for a moment everything else faded. The arguments, the cold silences, the loneliness I had carried in my marriage, like an invisible weight. The barn owner, Mrs. Ellis, had once told me that Grace was a big horse with a story. "She's been through things," she said one rainy afternoon. Her voice heavy with emotion, "but she doesn't trust easily. If she comes to you, it means something." I hadn't thought much of it then, brushing it off as one of those sentimental things people say about animals. But now, standing there with Grace so close, I began to wonder. My husband Alexander was supposed to meet me here that evening. We had agreed to try something different, something to bring us closer after years of drifting apart. Yet once again he was late, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the growing ache of disappointment. It wasn't anger I felt anymore. It was something quieter, something heavier. Grace shifted slightly, her head nudging my shoulder as if sensing the storm inside me. My ***T tightened, not with sadness, but with a flicker of something unexpected comfort, the kind that doesn't need words or explanations, just presence. But as I stood there trying to make sense of it all, I noticed something unusual in her gaze. She wasn't just looking at me, she was looking past me. Slowly I turned to see what had caught her attention, and that's when the real mystery began. I turned slowly, following Grace's gaze. At first I saw nothing, just the rolling hills and the distant trees that bordered the property. But then I noticed a shadow moving near the edge of the forest. It was too still, too deliberate. I felt a chill run down my spine. Grace, ever so watchful, shifted her weight and pawed the ground nervously. Her usually calm demeanor had disappeared, replaced by a tension that mirrored my own. I strained my eyes to make out the figure. Was it just the wind playing tricks with my mind? Or was someone really out there watching? My pulse quickened. I wanted to call out to Mrs. Ellis, but I didn't want to break the fragile moment between me and the big horse, and then, just as quickly as the figure appeared, it vanished behind the trees. My heart pounded in my ***T. I looked back at Grace, but she was already walking away, her hooves clicking softly on the gravel. She wasn't spooked, not exactly, but she seemed distracted, as if the brief encounter had unsettled her too. I stood there for a moment, debating whether I should investigate or let it go, but something told me that I couldn't ignore it. Just as I made my way toward the barn to fetch Mrs. Ellis, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Mark. I hadn't heard from him all evening, and now, as if on cue, he was calling. I hesitated before answering, unsure of what to expect. When I finally pressed the phone to my ear, his voice was tight, strained. I need to talk to you. Something's happened, something I should have told you a long time ago." His words hung in the air heavy with an unspoken truth. And then just as quickly, the call cut off. I stared at my phone, the silence of the dropped call hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Alexander's words echoed in my mind, sharp and unsettling. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. What was he talking about? And why had he waited until now to say it? As I stood frozen, my thoughts racing, the strange shadow from earlier flickered through my mind again. Was it connected? Was someone else involved in whatever Alexander was hinting at? I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something that stretched far beyond just me and Alexander. Grace, now farther away, turned her head back toward me, her ears flicking in the direction of the trees. Once again I followed her gaze, but this time the forest seemed even darker, more oppressive. The wind had picked up, rustling the branches, and a sense of foreboding filled the air. Every instinct told me to get out of there, to run back to the safety of the house. But something else, something deeper, urged me to stay. I couldn't ignore the pull anymore, not with everything that had happened tonight. I needed answers, even if they came with a cost. I grabbed my coat and started walking toward the trees, my footsteps loud in the stillness. The ground beneath me was soft, and the scent of wet earth filled my lungs. My heart raced faster with every step, the tension mounting in my ch***T. As I neared the tree line, I caught movement again, more distinct. This time someone was standing just beyond the clearing. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The figure was tall, cloaked in shadow, and didn't move. As I approached, I called out, my voice shaky, but firm. "Who's there?" But before I could react, the figure stepped forward, and I saw it clearly for the first time. It wasn't who I expected. As the figure stepped into the light, I felt my heart stop. It wasn't a stranger, nor was it anyone I'd been expecting. It was Alexander, but something about him was wrong. His face, usually so calm, was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He looked different. Haggard, disheveled, as though he hadn't slept in days. A part of me wanted to run to him to ask what was going on, but the words stuck in my throat. "Mark." I whispered, my voice barely audible in the cold night air. He didn't respond right away, his gaze flickering nervously around the trees as if he was checking for something or someone. It was clear he hadn't come here alone, but with what? Then he looked at me, his eyes filled with a raw panic I had never seen before. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice urgent, strained. I took a step toward him. Confused. "What's going on?" "You called me, and then I shouldn't have called you." He interrupted, his tone sharp, as if he regretted it already. "There's no time, you don't understand. They've been watching us, watching you." I froze, a cold shiver running down my spine. "What are you talking about?" Who? Alexander took a deep breath, his eyes darting around again, as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. "I never wanted you to find out, but it's too late. Now you're already involved." I wanted to ask more, to get him to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Something was wrong, something deep and dangerous. And just then, from the corner of my eye, I saw a movement in the trees. It wasn't just one person. There were several, too many for comfort. My pulse quickened, fear rising like a wave. Alexander grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Run." He whispered, "They're coming." Panic surged through me as Alexander yanked me by the arm, pulling me further into the woods. His grip was firm, almost desperate. I barely had time to process his cryptic words before the sound of footsteps echoed behind us. They weren't just the crunch of leaves underfoot. It was something heavier, more deliberate, like a slow-moving force closing in. My heart raced, my thoughts spinning in a blur of confusion and fear. "Who are they?" "Alexander?" I demanded, almost choking on my own words. "What's happening? Why are they after us?" Alexander didn't answer. His eyes were fixed ahead, but he was moving erratically, clearly panicked. It was as if he knew exactly where to go. But the further we ran, the more I felt the ground shifting beneath me. It wasn't just the fear. It was something else, a presence, an undeniable feeling that we were not alone. Something was out there, something watching, something waiting. We stumbled through the trees, branches, scratching at our faces until Alexander stopped abruptly. He pulled me to a halt just before a large, jagged rock formation that seemed to rise out of nowhere. The shadows around us deepened, and I heard them, whispers faint at first, but growing louder by the second. I looked around trying to locate the source, but the woods were still too still. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Alexander, tell me now, I need to know. He exhaled sharply, his body trembling. As he finally turned to face me, his expression was pained, and for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimmer of regret in his eyes. I never wanted this for you, he said, his voice shaking. I thought I could protect you, but it's too late. Before I could speak, a figure appeared from the shadows, stepping into the faint light cast by the moon. It was a woman, tall and elegant, with dark hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. She had an air of calm about her, but there was something unsettling in the way she moved. She was joined by several others, all dressed in black, their faces hidden in the darkness. The woman stepped forward, her eyes locking onto mine. You should have stayed out of this, she said, her voice low and smooth, yet carrying an undeniable threat. I felt my pulse quicken, every instinct telling me to run to fight. But my body was frozen. Alexander looked at me one last time, his face filled with guilt before he stepped forward, his eyes filled with a resigned acceptance. They're not human. Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible. They've been watching us, manipulating everything. I didn't know how to stop them. How to protect you. The woman smiled faintly, as if pleased by the fear in my eyes. You've been a pawn in a much larger game, my dear, a game that's been in motion for decades. Your husband, while useful, was never part of the plan. She turned her gaze to Alexander, who flinched under her stare. But you, she said, her voice now laced with venom. You were always meant to be a part of this. We've been waiting for you. I couldn't process her words. None of it made sense. I looked to Alexander for an explanation, but he was no longer the man I had married. His eyes were dull, lifeless, as though whatever connection we had was severed in an instant. You're part of something bigger than you think. The woman continued, her eyes now narrowing. You've always had the power, but you never knew it. My heart skipped a beat. Power me? What did she mean? But before I could ask, the ground beneath me seemed to shift as though the earth was responding to her words. The air grew thick and the forest around us began to hum with an energy I couldn't comprehend. Just as I braced myself for whatever would come next, a sharp, blinding light erupted from behind me. The force of it knocked me to the ground, disorienting me through the haze of light and confusion. I heard Alexander scream, a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before, raw and full of terror. I struggled to push myself to my feet, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of the chaos. When the light finally dimmed, I saw the woman and her followers in a defensive stance, staring wide-eyed at the rock formation behind me. It was then that I saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows, not a human but something else entirely. It was tall, almost ethereal, its skin glowing faintly as if alive, with a light of its own. It moved with an unnatural grace and its eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that sent a shock of recognition through my ***T. The woman gasped, "It's you, you're the one." And in that moment everything clicked, all the strange events, all the unsettling feelings. It was all leading to this. But the real shock came when I realized who I was meant to be and what I was about to become. The figure stepped forward, its glowing eyes piercing the darkness around us. It wasn't just its appearance that was unnerving. It was the sense of familiarity that washed over me as I looked at it. I didn't know who or what it was, but I felt a deep, undeniable connection, like I had always known this being, like it was a part of me. The woman who had been standing in the shadows recoiled as though the figure's presence was something far more powerful than anything she had ever encountered. "You're the one," she whispered almost in awe as her followers stepped back, their expressions shifting from confidence to something like fear. "We thought you were lost forever." I stood frozen, every instinct telling me to run, but something inside me held me still. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I couldn't look away from the figure before me. It tilted its head slightly, studying me, its presence overwhelming yet oddly comforting. A part of me felt as though it had always been meant to happen like this. Mark, still standing beside me, was trembling now, his eyes wide with shock. I didn't know it was you." His voice was broken, filled with regret, and I could see the torment in his eyes. "I never wanted you to be involved in this. I was trying to protect you." The figure finally spoke, its voice calm, yet commanding. "It is time for you to understand, child. All these years you've been living in a world that was never truly yours. The truth has always been hidden from you, and Alexander was only trying to keep you safe from the knowledge of who you really are. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. Who am I? What is all of this? My voice cracked, the weight of it all crashing down on me. I could feel the truth just out of reach, like a puzzle with missing pieces. And yet the answers were right in front of me. The figure stepped closer, its glowing form casting an ethereal light on everything around us. You are not just a woman from this world, not just someone bound by the limitations of human existence. You are a part of something ancient, something that transcends time and the power that runs through you. It is what has drawn them all here. You have the ability to change the course of history, to reshape the world as you know it. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I tried to process what it was saying. I don't understand. Why me? Why now? The figure's gaze softened and I could feel a strange sense of reassurance emanating from it. Because you were never meant to be ordinary. You were born with this power. Alexander and the others. Those who have watched you have kept you in the shadows, away from the truth, hoping you would never awaken to it. But now the time has come, you must choose what happens next. The woman and her followers, once so confident, were now retreating into the shadows. Defeated, they were no longer the hunters, but the hunted. The moment of tension in the air was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. I turned to Alexander, who had fallen to his knees, his face filled with guilt and regret. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I never wanted this for you. I just wanted to protect you from this life, but now you're ready to take control. I looked at him, seeing him for the first time in a way I never had before. He wasn't the man I had married, not anymore, and yet I could see that his intentions were always rooted in love, in fear, in a desire to keep me safe. But the truth was bigger than both of us, the power, the knowledge, it was mine now to wield. With one last glance at Alexander, I turned to face the figure. I had been running from the truth for so long, afraid of what it meant for my life, for my future, but I could no longer deny it. I had to face who I truly was, and whatever that meant. I was ready to embrace it. As I stepped toward the figure, a new sense of clarity washed over me. The answers were within me all along, hidden in plain sight. I could feel the weight of destiny on my shoulders, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a purpose. I was no longer a PA in someone else's game. I was the one who would shape the game. The figure nodded as if it knew I had made my choice. It is time, it said softly. The air shifted around me, charged with energy, and the darkness of the woods seemed to dissolve, replaced by the soft glow of something new. The future was unknown, but for the first time I felt ready. Whatever lay ahead. I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer afraid. The world was mine to change, and nothing could stop me. Leave your opinion in the comments. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.